Welcome to the Feminist Park podcast. I'm Kwame.
And I'm Leilani. It's great to be kicking off this journey with you all today.
Yeah, we're diving into work that's really closely tied to the vision behind the Feminist Park project.
Imagining these truly equitable public spaces, starting with the idea for an intersectional feminist park right here in Berlin.
Exactly. And this podcast, well, it's kind of an extension of that. We're going to be digging into the academic research that, supports and informs that kind of vision.
We'll be taking these dense, sometimes quite academic papers and really pulling out the core and insights.
And looking at them through specific lenses, things like environmental justice, intersectionality, anti-colonial thought, queer theory.
All the stuff that helps us think critically about space.
Picture this. You're standing on a sidewalk in Berlin.
Right in the heart of the Schöneberg district.
Yeah, exactly. And the air is cold, the street is gritty, and looming right in front of you is this massive, brutalist, totally abandoned bank building.
Except, well, it doesn't really look abandoned anymore.
No, not at all. It has been completely taken over. I mean, we are talking about 168 underground street artists who have somehow gotten inside.
Yeah.
And they've transformed every single square inch of this derelict gray concrete space into this vibrant, chaotic, just unapologetic explosion of counterculture.
And you walk in, and the smell of fresh aerosol paint is just overwhelming.
Oh, I can imagine.
Every room, every former office, the bank vaults themselves, they are plastered in murals, installations, graffiti.
Right.
It's raw, it feels deeply authentic, and crucially, it's completely ephemeral. Everyone knows the building is slated for demolition, so, it makes this specific fleeting moment in the city's underground scene feel incredibly urgent.
And that urgency, it's pulling people in like a magnet. There are literally 80,000 people lining up around the block over the course of just a few weeks.
Wow. 80,000.
Yeah. People are waiting for hours, standing in the freezing Berlin cold, just to get inside and experience this environment before the wrecking ball arrives.
It's a massive cultural event.
Right. And on the surface, it feels like this ultimate victory for independent underground art. The counterculture has successfully occupied the symbol of institutional wealth, like a literal bank.
Right, a bank.
But as you're standing in that massive line, shuffling forward inch by inch, a polite person wearing a neatly branded jacket walks up to you. They smile, and they hand you a glossy, heavy stock brochure. And you look down, and it is a high-end advertisement for ultra-luxury apartments.
Wow.
The exact luxury apartments that are going to be built on this very spot the second the art is bulldozed.
The psychological whiplash of that moment is just profound. You arrive thinking you're participating in a grassroots anti-establishment cultural moment.
Yeah.
You really believe you're witnessing a rebellion against the sterile commercialization of the city.
Right.
But instead, you realize you're standing inside a highly calculated, meticulously funded real estate marketing campaign.
It is brilliant, and honestly, it's somewhat terrifying. It's an example of a phenomenon that is completely reshaping modern cities. We're watching counterculture being repurposed as a highly profitable real estate tool.
It really is everywhere right now.
It is. So welcome to this deep dive. Our mission today is to pull back the curtain on this exact dynamic. We're going to explore the incredibly complex, often completely hidden relationship between urban development, gentrification, and temporary art.
And our roadmap for this exploration is a thoroughly documented, highly detailed academic paper. It's titled Artists and Urban Artwashing in 2020's Berlin: Co-optation, Gentrification, and Resistance. It was authored by Claudia Selden and published in the journal Urban Geography in 2026. Selden has done this painstaking work of tracking the money, the permits, and the social fallout of these projects.
She really maps it all out.
She does. It gives us a blueprint of how this ecosystem actually functions.
What makes Selden's research so fascinating to me is that she is looking at a highly explosive political battlefield, but without taking a side.
Yeah, that's crucial.
The source material dives into heavily debated topics. We're talking corporate housing monopolies, the ethics of gentrification, and even massive public referendums to expropriate property from private developers.
Heavy stuff.
Really heavy. And our approach today mirrors the paper's analytical lens. We aren't here to declare developers as villains or artists as victims.
Right, we're remaining completely impartial.
Exactly. We are here to impartially unpack the mechanics. We want to understand the levers being pulled behind the scenes and explore the fascinating social dynamics that the author presents.
Because the implications of these mechanics, they extend far beyond the borders of Germany.
Oh, absolutely.
Whether you live in Berlin or Brooklyn London, Austin, any city experiencing rapid urban growth, you have almost certainly seen this playbook unfolding in your own neighborhood.
You definitely have.
You've probably noticed that whenever a massive chain link fence goes up around a controversial new construction site, suddenly a hip, temporary pop-up gallery or a massive, edgy street art mural appears on that exact fence seemingly overnight.
Like magic.
Right. And we are going to reveal the hidden mechanics of how those installations get there, why developers are willing to send them, and the hidden socioeconomic costs that fall squarely on the shoulders of the artists and the local communities.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand how real estate developers are using art in the 2020s, we can't just look at the finished luxury condo.
No, you have to go back.
We have to travel back in time. We need to understand why temporary art became Berlin's defining global trademark in the first place. Because this aesthetic, this whole vibe of dancing in abandoned warehouses and painting on crumbling walls, it wasn't cooked up in a corporate boardroom. It started incredibly organically, out of pure historical necessity.
Yeah, to understand it, we have to situate ourselves in the immediate post-reunification landscape of Berlin.
Okay, set the scene for us.
When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, it didn't just unify a divided population. It crashed two entirely different legal and economic systems into each other overnight.
Right, East and West.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Particularly in former East Berlin, the city was suddenly faced with this massive abundance of abandoned land, derelict factories, empty residential buildings. And the critical factor Selden outlines is that a huge portion of this property was caught in an insurmountable legal limbo.
I mean, I'm trying to wrap my head around the scale of that legal chaos.
It was unprecedented.
We aren't just talking about a few lost deeds here. We're talking about properties where the ownership chain was broken multiple times over decades. You had buildings that might have been expropriated from Jewish families during the Nazi regime in the 1930s, right?
Yes, exactly.
Then nationalized by the socialist GDR government in the 1950s.
Yep.
And then suddenly abandoned when the wall fell. The paperwork alone to figure out who actually owned a single city block must have been a total nightmare.
A complete nightmare. It took lawyers and government bureaucrats years, sometimes decades, to untangle these incredibly complex property statuses.
Decades. Wow.
Yeah. And the state couldn't sell the buildings because they didn't legally know who had the right to sell them. So you have a city filled with a vast, empty, decaying infrastructure.
Just sitting there.
Just sitting there. And into this vacuum, a massive influx of young people, artists, students, cultural producers flooded into Berlin from all over the world.
Because it was cheap.
Because it was cheap, and they looked at these vacant plots and degraded, bullet-pocked buildings, not as urban blight, but as limitless blank canvases.
They began occupying these spaces in a very makeshift way. But what is so crucial to understand, I found this fascinating, is that the government and the temporary custodians of these buildings didn't immediately send in the riot police to kick them out.
No, they didn't.
The arrangement they came to was almost laughably pragmatic.
It really was. The city essentially looked at the situation and realized they had absolutely no budget to maintain or secure thousands of empty buildings.
Right.
So they struck a deal with the creatives. The authorities basically said, look, we cannot do anything with this factory for the next 5 or 10 years while the courts figure out who owns it.
Yeah.
If you move in, if you just make sure nobody sets the place on fire, and you stop scavengers from stripping the copper wire out of the walls, you can have the space for next to nothing.
They were signing decades-long contracts for zero rent.
Literally zero.
Sometimes it was just a tiny symbolic fee, like, I don't know, 1 Deutschmark a month, simply to act as physical guardians against vandalism.
Yeah.
And that specific economic reality is the incubator for everything Berlin became.
That is the definitive variable. The lack of financial pressure. When a painter or a musician doesn't have to worry about generating a massive amount of capital by the first of every month just to keep a roof over their head,
Their whole world opens up.
their relationship with their work fundamentally changes. They can experiment endlessly. They can take wild creative risks.
Yeah.
They can build massive installations that have zero commercial viability simply because they have the physical space and the time to do it.
It turned the entire city into a massive, decentralized laboratory for culture.
It really did.
This wasn't art designed to be sold in a pristine, white-walled gallery to wealthy collectors.
Yeah.
This was art integrated into the decay of the city itself.
Right.
It allowed this incredibly unique, avant-garde subculture to flourish.
Right.
And over the next 2 decades, that specific subculture, the techno clubs and power plants, the galleries and bunkers, that is what put Berlin on the global map for our generation.
Absolutely. It became the defining aesthetic of the city.
Drawing millions of tourists every year.
Yeah, and the local term for this organic practice of temporary use is Zwischennutzung.
Zwischennutzung. Did I say that right?
Close enough. It translates directly to interim uses. And for a very long time, this was just the accepted rhythm of the city.
Right.
A building would sit empty, artists would take it over, create something incredible for a few years, and eventually the city would figure out what to do with it.
But as Selden's paper meticulously details, a massive shift occurred as we moved into the 2000s and 2010s.
Yes.
The courts finally finished their work. The legal knots were untangled. The property ownership statuses were finally resolved.
Exactly. And once the deed is clear, the building can be sold.
Boom.
Over 70% of those previously unclear state-managed properties were sold off to professional housing companies, land incorporators, private investors.
Wow. 70%.
The era of the blank canvas was officially over, replaced by an era of intense, highly capitalized land speculation.
Okay, so let me make sure I'm tracking the irony here.
Go for it.
The city government essentially allowed this underground temporary art scene to flourish because it solved the logistical problem for them.
Yep.
Then they actively used that exact vibrant, gritty scene to market Berlin globally as the coolest, most creative city on earth, drawing in massive amounts of tourism and foreign investment.
Right.
And once that investment arrived, the city turned around and sold the very ground that the culture was standing on to private developers, effectively evicting the culture they just used as a marketing campaign.
That summarizes the dynamic perfectly.
That is wild.
Selden frames this transition within the broader academic concept of neoliberal urbanism.
Okay, define that for us.
In this model, the state deliberately steps back from its traditional post-war role as the primary planner and provider of public housing and public facilities. Instead, the government allows private real estate developers and the free market to dictate the course of urban renewal.
Right.
So the state's role shifts from providing for the citizens to facilitating a profitable environment for the investors.
So the developers buy the land, they look at these organic artist collectives, and they basically see an obstacle to profit.
Exactly.
So the original artists are evicted, the makeshift galleries are shut down, and the warehouses are prepped for demolition.
Yep.
But then the developers immediately face a new problem.
A very expensive problem.
Right. They are trying to sell incredibly expensive apartments in a city where the primary selling point is supposed to be the cool underground vibe.
Yeah.
If you bulldoze all the cool underground spaces, how do you convince a wealthy buyer that the neighborhood is still edgy and desirable?
You have to artificially recreate the very aesthetic you just destroyed.
Wow.
They need to mine the vibe of the subculture without actually hosting the subculture. And that necessity brings us to the core mechanism analyzed in this deep dive.
Artwashing.
Artwashing.
Selden defines artwashing very clearly in the context of the 2020s. We aren't talking about traditional corporate art here.
No, definitely not.
We aren't talking about a developer commissioning a pleasant, abstract bronze sculpture to sit permanently in the marble lobby of a new skyscraper.
Yep.
Artwashing is the strategic, temporary use of art and the artists themselves on private property to revamp a neighborhood's image with the ultimate goal of driving up land speculation and rental yields.
And that distinction between permanent corporate art and 2020's artwashing is absolutely crucial.
Unpack that a bit.
The traditional corporate art of the past was static. It was meant to project stability, classic wealth, permanence.
Like, we are a serious bank.
Exactly. It said, this institution has been here for a century, and it will be here for a century more. But the 2020s Berlin real estate market relies on the exact opposite.
Because that's not what the buyers want.
Right. They utilize ephemeral, fast-paced, deliberately temporary art. They commission massive murals on buildings that are scheduled to be demolished in a month.
Right.
They host 3-week pop-up galleries in gutted storefronts. They throw temporary weekend rave parties in former industrial spaces right before the construction crews arrive.
I am struggling to understand the financial logic from the developer's perspective.
It seems counterintuitive.
It does. If I am a real estate holding company, my entire goal is maximizing return on investment.
Yes.
Why would I allocate hundreds of thousands of euros from my marketing budget to commission a massive, intricate piece of street art on a building that I have already scheduled for demolition?
Right.
I am literally paying to create something that I am going to destroy with a wrecking ball. How does that translate to higher prices for the luxury condos I eventually build there?
That's a great question. To understand the return on investment for temporary art, Selden updates sociologist Pierre Bourdieu's foundational theory of cultural capital for the 2020s.
Oh, interesting.
Back in the 1970s and 1980s, Bourdieu argued that the kind of art or culture you consume acts as a marker of your social class.
Okay.
It separates you from the masses. It's a psychological game of distinction.
Right, so in the 80s, playing the game of distinction meant proving you understood the nuances of classical music, or having an encyclopedic knowledge of fine wine, or owning an original oil painting.
Exactly.
It was about showing off a very scholastic, elite, highly educated taste.
But fast forward to today. Look at the target demographic for these new luxury developments in Berlin.
Tech bros.
Basically, you are largely dealing with highly paid tech workers, international creatives, and digital nomads.
Right.
And for this demographic, distinction is no longer about proving you enjoy opera. It's about consuming what sociologists call singular experiences.
Singular experience.
It's about a relentless pursuit of perceived authenticity. What's fascinating here is how developers use temporary art to tap into that exact desire.
I see the connection now. The fact that the art is doomed is actually the main selling point.
Yes.
It creates a synthetic scarcity. If the pop-up gallery is only there for 3 weeks before the building is torn down, attending that gallery becomes the ultimate you-had-to-be-there flex. You can't buy that experience later. You can't just go see it in a museum.
The ephemeral nature of the art acts as a removable sticker of authenticity for the real estate project.
A removable sticker of authenticity. That's a great phrase.
Because the developer is selling a massive, expensive, fundamentally boring corporate asset. A glass and steel box of apartments.
Right.
But by wrapping the construction site in temporary underground street art, they prove to the high-income buyer that this specific property is edgy.
It has a soul.
Exactly. It suggests that by buying an apartment here, the buyer is tying themselves to the rebellious, avant-garde history of the city.
It separates their glass box from the thousands of other tedious, homogeneous glass boxes going up in every other city in Europe.
Yep.
They're essentially slapping a limited edition underground streetwear logo onto a multi-million euro real estate development.
That's a perfect analogy.
It's a completely risk-free way to appropriate a rebel aesthetic. You get all the cool points of being associated with street art, and then you wipe the slate clean, evict everyone, and build the luxury condos with zero actual rebellious elements remaining.
But executing that illusion requires an incredibly specific skill set.
I would imagine.
A 50-year-old real estate executive in a tailored suit cannot simply walk into an underground squat in Berlin and ask a collective of anti-capitalist street artists to paint his marketing brochure.
Oh man, he would be laughed out of the room.
Or worse, the cultural gap is just too wide.
Yeah.
And this necessity gives rise to a crucial new player in the urban development ecosystem, highlighted heavily in Selden's text.
The corporate curator.
And the corporate curator.
This role is absolutely fascinating to me. Developers are no longer just hiring architects, structural engineers, and contractors.
No, they're going much further.
They are establishing dedicated in-house departments of culture, and they are hiring these highly specialized art consultants.
The corporate curator essentially acts as a bilingual liaison.
Right.
They have to speak the language of the corporate boardroom. They understand zoning laws, return on investment, liability insurance.
But they also have to look the part.
Exactly. They have deep ties to the underground art world. They know the artists, they know the trends, and they know how to navigate gritty studio spaces without looking like a corporate spy.
I mean, the curator essentially functions as an authenticity launderer.
Wow, yes.
They provide a vital diplomatic shield. When the curator approaches the artists, it doesn't look like a greedy land speculator trying to exploit free labor.
Right.
The curator frames the developer as an enlightened, benevolent patron of the arts, generously offering young talent a massive platform and free materials.
And that diplomatic shield is not just a nice bonus. Selden points out it is structurally necessary for these companies to operate in Berlin right now.
Because of the political climate.
Exactly. The real estate sector is currently deeply, overwhelmingly vilified by the local population. The housing crisis is so severe that developers are viewed with extreme suspicion and anger.
Yeah, understandably.
Therefore, art washing isn't just a tactic to sell units in one specific building. It's a desperate attempt to revamp the corporate brand itself, to soften their image in the eyes of a hostile public and cautious city politicians.
So, theory and sociological frameworks are vital, but Selden's paper grounds all of this in a massive, meticulously detailed case study.
Tough.
She focuses extensively on one specific developer who essentially wrote the modern playbook on this strategy.
A German real estate company called Pandion.
Right. And Pandian's trajectory perfectly illustrates every theoretical mechanism we have discussed.
It really is textbook. The execution of their strategy begins with the exact scenario you described in the opening hook of our discussion.
Project The House in 2017.
Yes.
Pandion acquires this massive derelict former bank building in the Schöneberg neighborhood.
Great.
The master plan is to demolish it and build a complex of high-end luxury residential flats.
Right.
But before they bring in the wrecking balls, they initiate a partnership with a well-known, highly connected local street art group called Die Dixons.
Pandion essentially hands over the keys to the bank.
There you go.
Right. They invite 168 artists to come in and use the entire interior as a temporary canvas for 6 weeks.
And the public response is staggering. 80,000 people visit the installation. It becomes a massive media event.
Huge.
But Pandion's marketing department is completely embedded in the experience. They are on site, handing out high-gloss brochures for the future luxury flats to the people waiting in line to see the anti-establishment art.
Which is just so brazen.
It really is. And the financial result, every single luxury unit in the future building sold out before the construction was even completed.
Incredible. The marketing strategy was an undeniable, overwhelming financial success. Pandion successfully engineered a process where the subcultural capital generated by the temporary art was transferred directly into the financial capital of the real estate.
Magic.
Yeah. And having proved that the concept works brilliantly, Pandion doubled down.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
They moved their focus and their massive capital reserves to an entirely different, far more politically sensitive neighborhood for 2 massive new commercial projects called The Shelf and The Grid.
And to truly understand the impact of what Pandion did next, we have to pause and look at the specific neighborhood they targeted. Kreuzberg. You cannot talk about Berlin without talking about the intense, loaded history of Kreuzberg.
No, you really can't. Kreuzberg is unique because its geography defined its demographics for decades.
How so?
During the Cold War, when the city was divided, Kreuzberg was in West Berlin, but it was pushed right up against the physical concrete of the Berlin Wall.
Oh, wow.
It was surrounded on 3 sides by the border. It was literally the end of the line.
Right.
Because of its peripheral enclosed location, it saw very little corporate investment. The housing stock was old and undesirable to the wealthy mainstream of West Germany.
Because the rent was incredibly cheap and the area was just ignored by the establishment, it became a haven for marginalized communities. It attracted students avoiding the West German military draft, radical left-wing youth movements, squatters, and crucially, a massive population of migrants.
Yes, particularly guest workers from Turkey.
Right. Who were recruited to rebuild the country, but given very few housing options elsewhere.
And over the decades, this mix of neglect and diverse populations resulted in the formation of a rich, tight-knit, incredibly dense cultural community.
But then the wall falls in 1989.
Boom.
Suddenly, the geographical reality of the city shifts violently. Kreuzberg is no longer a forgotten neighborhood on the periphery of the West. Because the city is unified, Kreuzberg is suddenly located right in the dead center of a booming European capital.
Exactly. The geographical shift makes the land incredibly valuable.
Yes.
But the culture that developed there during the years of neglect is what makes it marketable.
That's the key.
Today, the Berlin government and the tourism boards officially market Kreuzberg globally as the hippest location in the universe.
Quote unquote.
Quote unquote. It's famous for its nightlife, its diversity, its rebellious spirit.
But the reality on the ground for the people actually living there is starkly divided. You have this globally marketed hipness, these high-end boutiques and tech startups existing quite literally right next to extreme poverty, deeply marginalized communities and significant drug hotspots.
It's a severe contrast.
The original population is still there, trying to survive in a rapidly gentrifying environment.
And this is where Selden applies a crucial class and migrant justice lens to her analysis.
Okay, let's dig into that.
She makes the argument that when a massive developer like Pandion drops highly curated, high-end art events into this specific complex neighborhood, it is absolutely not a neutral, benevolent act.
Right, of course not.
Selden quotes researchers who describe this deployment of art as a regenerative detergent.
A regenerative detergent. I find that metaphor incredibly powerful.
Striking, isn't it?
It really is. The high-end art is deployed specifically to cleanse the image of the street. It signals to a higher income, predominantly white, tech-oriented demographic that this space is now safe for their consumption. It smooths over the rough edges of the neighborhood's reality.
And the tragic irony is that this aesthetic upgrade, this cleansing, disproportionately impacts and displaces the local residents of color and the migrant backgrounds who actually built the culture of the neighborhood in the first place.
Exactly.
These are communities that already face severe systemic marginalization in German society, and now the very culture they incubated is being used as the tool to price them out of their homes.
With that deep socioeconomic context in mind, let's look at how Pandion actually executed their strategy in Kreuzberg with the two projects, the Shelf and the Grid. They purchased two massive opposing plots of land on Prinzenstrasse. Now, this land previously belonged to a beloved, long-standing local car rental company.
At a very utilitarian working-class business.
Exactly. Pandion's master plan was to clear the land and build massive, ultra-modern office and commercial spaces designed to attract international tech companies.
So they own the land, they have the architectural plans, but they run headfirst into a classic German reality.
Yeah.
The bureaucracy.
Oh, the bureaucracy.
Getting the actual construction permits approved and stamped in Berlin takes a notoriously long time. The process can drag on for years.
So you have a corporate developer sitting on prime, incredibly expensive real estate, bleeding money every month while waiting for the city to issue the permits.
Right.
A traditional developer might just put up a fence and hire a security guard to keep trespassers out until the bulldozers arrive.
Sure, that's standard.
But Pandion, however, decides to squeeze the stone. They turn to the old Berlin tradition of Zwischennutzung.
Right, interim use. While waiting for the paperwork, Pandion formally offers the empty, deteriorating spaces for free interim cultural use.
Very generous of them.
Exactly. For months, they host a relentless schedule of multimedia art shows, photography exhibitions, contemporary dance performances, and they even managed to host the prestigious Berlin Art Prize on the site.
And on the surface, their PR department spins this as a massive philanthropic favor to the local Kreuzberg community.
Oh, absolutely.
They present themselves as generously giving back to the cultural scene by providing much-needed space. But Selden's research digs into the corporate filings and reveals just how calculated and systemic this strategy really was.
It goes deep.
Pandion didn't just host a few parties. They actually helped co-found an online platform called Transiträume EV.
The name translates to transit spaces. And that EV designation is critical in German law.
What does it mean?
It stands for Eingetragener Verein, which implies a registered nonprofit association.
Ah, so it sounds official.
Right. It gives the organization an immediate aura of civic duty and public benefit. The platform's publicly stated goal sounds incredibly noble. They claim they want to make temporary cultural use of vacant property the standard practice in Berlin.
They pose as a neutral, benevolent mediator.
Exactly, connecting struggling creatives who need space with property owners who have empty buildings.
But when Selden looks under the hood of this nonprofit, the illusion shatters. The treasurer of Transiträume EV happens to be the Berlin branch manager for Pandion itself.
What a coincidence.
And one of the primary official supporters listed on the platform is the Federal Association of Independent Real Estate and Housing Companies.
Which is huge. Protesting artists and housing activists quickly pointed out that this association is literally the main political lobbying arm for massive real estate owners in Germany.
Unbelievable.
The platform is not a neutral mediator. It is a developer-funded mechanism designed to normalize their own business strategy.
It is a brilliantly insidious tool to maximize property utility during the bureaucratic downtime. By funneling artists into their buildings, the developer solves multiple problems simultaneously.
They really do.
They get free, round-the-clock security because the artists keep the building occupied, preventing vandalism.
Yep.
They generate massive, positive PR value by appearing philanthropic. And most importantly, the constant stream of trendy art events preconditions the neighborhood for the eventual spike in rents.
And the financial results of this strategy in Kreuzberg are staggering. Selden provides the raw numbers.
Yeah.
They are shocking.
Lay 'em on us.
Once Pandion completed the grid, the new office rents hit 32.48 euros per square meter.
Wow.
To put that in perspective, that is almost 5 times higher than the average price for office space in Berlin at the time.
And the ripple effect on the surrounding neighborhood was devastating for the locals. Between 2012 and 2024, as these art-washed mega projects moved in, the residential rents in that specific district of Kreuzberg skyrocketed from 8.5 euros to over 19.42 euros per square meter.
More than double. Selden defines this as a textbook example of anticipatory programmed gentrification.
Programmed gentrification.
Right. The developers are not passively buying land and waiting for the neighborhood to organically improve over 20 years. They are actively, aggressively engineering the economic upgrade through the temporary, highly publicized deployment of art.
Okay, we need to address the most uncomfortable part of this entire equation.
Let's do it.
It is incredibly easy for us to sit here, look at the staggering rent increases, point fingers at the massive corporate developers, and label them as the villains of the story. But Pandion doesn't paint the murals. The PR agency doesn't weld the sculptures. Without the actual artists physically participating, creating the work, and bringing their audience to the building, this entire strategy completely collapses.
That's true.
So why do they do it? Why do artists willingly participate in a system that is fundamentally driving their own eventual displacement from the city?
This is perhaps the most nuanced, emotionally complex, and critical part of Selden's entire paper.
Yeah.
It would be very intellectually lazy to just label the participating artists as sellouts, or to accuse them of being willing gentrifiers.
Right, it's never that simple.
Instead, the author brings a deeply empathetic socioeconomic analysis to the artists themselves. We have to look past the romanticized idea of the starving artist and look at the brutal material reality of trying to survive as a creative in the 2020s.
And the defining characteristic of that reality is extreme precarity.
Absolutely. Because of the exact housing crisis driven by the proliferation of these luxury developments, the traditional studio spaces in Berlin have been demolished or renovated into tech offices.
So they literally have nowhere to go.
Exactly. Artists simply cannot afford workspace anymore. The wait lists for state-subsidized studios are years long. So imagine you're a young sculptor with nowhere to work.
Okay.
When a massive company like Pandion comes along and says, hey, we have this massive empty warehouse, and you can use it for your collective for free for the next 6 months.
It doesn't feel like a trap.
Exactly. It feels like a desperate lifeline.
But the critical analysis asks, is it really free? The developer isn't charging them euros, but aren't the artists essentially paying rent through their uncompensated labor?
Yes.
They are generating a massive amount of image capital for the developer, which the developer immediately monetizes.
And that is the exact argument made by the more radical critical artist interviewed in the paper. They argue that free space is a corporate illusion.
It's a trade.
Right. By simply moving their supplies in and occupying the building, the artists are providing a service. They act as unpaid security guards. They often have to clean up the derelict spaces themselves.
And there is a darker sociological function here, too.
Oh, definitely.
Selden notes that simply by being present, the artists are sanitizing the space. Their presence naturally deters and displaces people deemed undesirable by the developers.
Right, the homeless population, drug users, marginalized youths.
Keeping them away from the valuable property. The artists inadvertently act as a human barrier that secures the asset, all while lending their hard-earned cultural credibility to the developer's marketing brochure.
It is a painful paradox. But as the text continually notes, artists do not exist outside of capitalism. They are deeply embedded in it.
They have rent to pay. They have to buy groceries.
Exactly. And in the highly competitive, globally connected, Instagram-driven art market of the 2020s, visibility is the only currency that matters.
The paper describes this as being trapped in a network of dependencies.
Right.
A young artist might desperately need a high-profile, massive installation to put in their digital portfolio just to get noticed by a gallery.
They need the exposure.
Even if a corporate commission from a developer pays terribly or offers zero financial compensation at all, The exposure and the physical space to work might be the only thing keeping that artist from having to abandon their practice entirely and take on a minimum wage, non-art job.
When the choice is between participating in an art washing campaign or giving up your life's work, the decision becomes much more complicated.
Of course.
However, this participation does not go unnoticed by the broader community, and it has caused massive, bitter rifts within the artistic scene itself. Selden details a rising phenomenon of naming and shaming among peers.
The paper highlights one specific controversy that perfectly encapsulates this internal civil war. It centers around Deutsche Wohnen,
Which is one of Germany's largest, most powerful corporate real estate holding companies.
right. And a few years ago, Deutsche Wohnen decided to act as the primary financial sponsor for the Berlin Mural Fest.
Which is a massive, highly visible annual street art event.
Exactly. To understand the fallout, you have to understand the specific political context of that exact moment. At the time they sponsored the festival, Deutsche Wohnen was the primary target of a massive citywide grassroots political movement.
It was huge.
The citizens of Berlin were literally organizing a public referendum to legally force the government to expropriate, meaning legally seize and nationalize thousands of apartments away from Deutsche Wohnen.
And the public anger was boiling over
Right.
because Deutsche Wohnen's business practices were widely viewed by the public as one of the primary drivers of the city's crippling housing crisis.
Right.
They were accused of systematically buying up affordable housing, doing minimal renovations, and jacking up the rents, forcing longtime residents out of their homes.
So you have a massive corporation facing a literal existential threat from an angry public, and they decide to deploy millions of euros to sponsor a street art festival.
Classic PR move.
It was a transparent attempt to wash their image and align themselves with the city's beloved counterculture. When local and international artists agreed to accept that sponsorship money and paint murals for the festival, the backlash from their peers was immediate, visceral, and severe.
Selden notes that artists who climbed the scaffolding to paint for that festival faced harsh public confrontation.
Oh, I bet.
Their fellow artists, housing activists, local community members basically cornered them on the street and on social media.
Right.
They demanded to know how these artists could ethically justify lending their street credibility to a corporation that was actively making the city unlivable for the very people viewing the art.
That's a tough question to answer.
The pressure was immense. Some artists were so conflicted and overwhelmed by the moral implications that they actually abandoned their murals midway and publicly withdrew from the festival.
This intense internal conflict within the artistic community was a turning point. The frustration didn't just stay confined to angry Instagram comments or tense, whispered conversations at gallery openings.
It catalyzed.
It catalyzed. It spawned organized, highly tactical, physical resistance right at the front doors of these real estate developments.
Which brings us to one of the most fascinating groups detailed in Selden's research.
Yes, a collective known as Kunstblock and Beyond, or simply K&B.
K&B is a counteractive artist collective that formed in 2017 with a very specific, highly focused mandate.
What was it?
To physically and culturally protest displacement, gentrification, and specifically the exact phenomenon of corporate art washing.
Locally, they don't even call it art washing. They call it keys washing, utilizing the specific Berlin slang term, keys, which refers to your local, deeply personal neighborhood block.
Right.
They view art washing as an attack on the very fabric of their keys. And they specifically targeted Pandian's mega project, The Shelf, in Kreuzberg. The ongoing cat-and-mouse game between this scrappy grassroots artist collective and the massive, heavily funded corporate PR machine is incredible to analyze.
It perfectly highlights the immense power dynamics at play. Selden details KB's evolving protest tactics, and you can see how they had to learn the rules of the new game the hard way.
So how did they start?
Initially, they tried a fairly standard, visually oriented protest approach. During one of the highly publicized interim art events hosted by Pandian inside the Shelf, members of K&B infiltrated the crowd wearing matching T-shirts that simply asked, "Who is Pandian?"
The logic makes sense. They wanted to disrupt the vibe.
Exactly.
They wanted to make the attendees, who were drinking free wine and looking at cool art, acutely aware of the corporate entity that actually owned the space and force them to think about what was going to happen to the neighborhood the next morning.
Right.
But Pandian wasn't running this event themselves. They had hired a highly professional, slick marketing and PR agency called Glut to manage the optics.
Yes.
And Glut's response to the protest was ruthlessly brilliant.
The PR agency didn't call the police. They didn't ask security to throw the protesters out, which would have created a negative, viral scene.
No, they were much smarter than that.
Instead, the agency's photographers simply walked up to the protesters, took high-quality photos of them wearing their Who is Pandion shirts, and immediately posted those photos on the event's official corporate Instagram account.
But they manipulated the context. They wrote captions that made it look like K&B was actually there supporting the event.
Yes.
They framed the protesters as an edgy, interactive part of the exhibition, hyping up the developers' engagement with the community.
It is infuriating, but from a purely strategic standpoint, it is a masterclass in co-optation.
They literally art-washed the protest against art-washing in real time.
Exactly. They absorbed the rebellion, packaged it as an aesthetic, and fed it right back into their marketing machine.
It was a brutal, clarifying lesson for K&B. They realized instantly that in the modern era of social media, any protest that looks pretty or aesthetically interesting or easily photographable will simply be eaten by the corporate machine.
You cannot fight an aesthetic war against an entity that has millions of euros dedicated to absorbing aesthetics.
So they had to evolve. They had to create resistance that was fundamentally unco-optable.
Selden details how they aggressively escalated their tactics. They moved away from T-shirts and moved to what they called beamer actions.
What's a beamer action?
They acquired high-powered digital projectors, set them up across the street from Pandion's buildings, and blasted massive, disruptive, anti-gentrification films and data about rent increases directly onto the facade of the building while the corporate cocktail events were happening inside.
You cannot Instagram a giant projection about eviction statistics and make it look like a positive, trendy vibe.
No, you definitely can't.
They also engaged in a tactic called poster hacking. They meticulously studied Pandion's exact corporate fonts, their specific color palettes, and their sleek design language.
Oh, this is clever.
They printed thousands of high-quality posters that looked identical to the developer's official marketing materials. But instead of advertising luxury office space, they changed the text to read things like, "Profit doesn't matter," or highlighted the displacement of locals. They plastered these hacked posters all over the neighborhood's electrical boxes and construction fences.
And they moved into guerrilla theater, too. During the prestigious Berlin Art Prize, which Pandion was hosting to gain cultural legitimacy, K&B set up a fake, highly visible award ceremony on the public sidewalk right outside the front doors.
Oh, wow.
They used a megaphone to publicly attempt to hand Pandion an image-washing award, forcing the attendees to walk past a literal manifestation of the developer's hypocrisy to get inside.
Yeah.
It was relentless, highly tactical disruption.
Now we have to look at the material outcome. Did these actions, the beamer projections, the hacked posters, the fake awards, did they actually stop the Pandion buildings from going up?
No.
No. The buildings were completed. They were eventually sold to a massive international real estate fund, and the office and residential rents in Kreuzberg skyrocketed exactly as the activists predicted.
Yep.
But Selden makes a compelling argument that concluding the resistance was a failure misses the point entirely. The resistance was still deeply structurally impactful in a different way.
The real lasting impact wasn't on the corporate developer, who was largely insulated by capital.
Right.
The impact was on the cultural community itself. K&B's actions forced a mandatory reckoning within the Berlin art scene. Their peer-to-peer conversations and their relentless exposure of the mechanics actually worked.
They successfully infiltrated the art schools and educated the next generation of art students about the hidden mechanics of interim use, warning them about how their desire for space would be weaponized.
Which is so important.
They got individual artists to finally realize how their free labor was being used in a predatory way. And most impressively, their pressure campaigns actually convinced several established artists and collectives to legally pull out of planned exhibitions at developer-owned sites.
Costing the developers the cultural capital they desperately needed.
Exactly. They systematically stripped away the romantic illusion that these corporate projects were just free space for art and exposed the brutal underlying transaction.
So if we trace this entire journey, we have moved from the chaotic, liberating fall of the Berlin Wall to 80,000 people waiting to get into a doomed bank, to the granular reality of fake corporate awards on the sidewalks of Kreuzberg.
It's quite a journey.
The core, undeniable takeaway from Selden's incredibly detailed research is a paradigm shift in how we view the urban environment.
So what does this all mean?
It means the cool, creative city aesthetic that so many of us love, the vibrant murals and pop-up galleries, is increasingly not an organic expression of a community.
Right.
It is a highly calculated, deliberately temporary tool wielded by massive real estate developers to inflate property values, while the very artists generating that vibe are systematically squeezed out by the massive wealth they unwittingly helped attract.
This system has demonstrated an incredible, almost terrifying capacity to commodify absolutely everything.
Everything.
It doesn't just commodify the physical land or the brick and mortar of the buildings, it commodifies the subculture. It commodifies the resistance to the subculture. Yeah. Even rebellion, if presented in the right aesthetic package, can be packaged, utilized to drive up the price per square meter, and then ruthlessly discarded when the real construction begins.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it shows how late-stage urban capitalism can just absorb its own critiques.
Yeah.
Next time you see a trendy pop-up gallery in a chain-link fence construction site, you now have the tools to ask, who owns this land and who is this art actually serving?
And that leaves us with one final provocative thought for you to mull over as you go about your day. We have spent this entire deep dive examining how this playbook works flawlessly in the physical world. Temporary physical art is co-opted by physical real estate to gentrify physical neighborhoods. But our world is increasingly, inevitably shifting online.
Yeah, that's where things get even more interesting.
As major tech corporations pour billions of dollars into building the metaverse or constructing massive enclosed digital platforms and virtual communities, we have to ask, will we see the rise of digital art washing? Will these massive tech developers bring in underground avant-garde digital creators to make a sterile corporate digital platform feel authentic and edgy?
It's highly likely.
And once that platform gains a critical mass of users and the massive corporate advertisers move in to monetize the space, will those original digital pioneers find themselves priced out of the digital real estate?
Will their code and art be algorithmically bulldozed to make way for the digital equivalent of a luxury condo brochure?
Exactly. If the history of the physical city is any indicator, the cycle might just be getting started in a whole new dimension.
That's a sobering thought.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the mechanics of our changing cities. Until next time.
This knowledge is a tool, really. A tool for seeing your city differently, and potentially for helping to change it.
It's been a really insightful deep dive, I think. This document provides such a vital framework, especially for projects like the Feminist Park Project that are trying to build something fundamentally different. It shows just how interlinked urban design and social justice are.
It really does. But it also shows the scale of the challenge, right? It requires sustained effort, real commitment, and a genuine willingness to shift power dynamics in how cities get made and managed.
Definitely. It makes you think about how we ensure those voices, the ones that have been excluded, are actually heard and centered.
There's another quote from Sarah Ahmed that feels relevant here.
Go on.
She says, "If you have to shout to be heard, you are heard as shouting."
That's powerful.
It makes you ponder, doesn't it? How can the design of public space itself work differently? How can it amplify the voices of those who've been historically silenced, ensuring their needs are met without them having to shout just to be noticed?
How can design itself listen? That's a really provocative thought to end on.
A lot to think about.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.